and how it typically works in terms of applications interacting with databases.
So with SQL, I think what I'm going to probably do is just, instead of recycling any of the trainings I've done before, I'll probably just record one and upload to the class modules. That way it's there permanently. But for applications, right? So the database layer, the database layer is behind, and the application layer is in front. So an application is a fancy way for just saying an interface you're working from. So whether it's an app on your phone, you're interacting with, let's say you're placing an order through Amazon. That interface is the application. All of the records for the transactions you do, so the inventory that updates when I make a purchase, right? Let's say I'm a seller on Amazon and I have 10 bags I'm selling. You purchase one, it updates my inventory to 9, right? All of that information is happening at the back end. That lives on the database. So the database is constantly being updated. The front end is Amazon. So whether I'm interacting with through the website or through an app interface like on the phone, in phone app, it's still considered an app, an application, right? That's the application layer. Right? Whether that front end that you're using to either receive new inputs or do transactions, fulfill transactions, that's the application, right? So whether it's you doing something through your bank, maybe doing a transaction, on your bank, or filing a claim through insurance, placing an order on Walmart, that place you're working from is the application layer, and it's literally driven by what's in the back, the data. So if there's no database behind the scenes, the application is going to just be, it's just an interface. It's not going to give us the output we get. So that all of the output we see at the front end is pulling from, the back end. That's database back end. Yeah, so we manage the back end. The front end is the fancy one, the web developers, the app developers, the .NET people. That's their own layer, but there has to be an integration or a connection from. By the time you start working, you see how these things work. They have what we call a connection string. So that connection string is like the bridge between the front and the database. So when that, excuse me, when those transactions happen, basically instructions are sent to the back end, and then we're able to receive these requests, and that's how it works. The data is queried, updated, changed, depending on what's the instruction. So if you're filling a form, for example, new data is being sent to the database, right? If you're going in to maybe delete a record from an employment portal, you're deleting records from the database at the back, but you're doing it through the front end. But what happens is a script is run that goes and implements the instructions you send from the front end. That front end is the application, the database at the back, and the back end is database. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So, but we're concerned mostly about we are concerned about the database. So we're back end people. Yeah, our focus is on the back end, and yeah, but I feel like now in the future, this is like I have no this is just me postulating, but I feel like at some point both worlds are going to start merging, because I'm looking at the way the programmatic design for some of the newer tools, especially data warehousing tools. So I don't know if you've heard of Snowflake or Redshift. Those are like data analysis tools. And I'm going away from I'm digressing a little bit. There are data analysis and also Yeah, data analysis, yes, the analytical tools. So they deal with data warehouses, but they also do reporting. But what they've done is they've typically these things are separate, right? In the standard way of the world of data is the data warehouse leaves, independent. If you need to run your reports, you have your tools separate that connects to the data. You have like the Tableaus and Power BIs connecting to these massive data warehouses, right, that are standalone. But with Snowflake, Redshift, some of these other newer tools, now they've merged them into one. So we're beginning to see that merger between the front and back end in some form. So I almost feel like down the road there's going to start being that marriage, right, of sorts, where the application layer is merging with the data layer, and again, I have no data sheets to back that up, but that's just following the technology. That's kind of where I feel like it's going to go.
Mm. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So just taking it further, right? So if you can explain the application login to the context of security. Um, I know you had mentioned something about that.
Yeah, so if you go down, there's a whole module on security. So I actually explain um logins and all of it. But your the part of security we're really concerned about as database administrator is the database security. How do you access the data, right? So I'm not particularly concerned about Active Directory or network security because we don't control any of that.
Mm,
Uh, so the network engineers will manage access to router, all of the policies, policies and all of those things. These are server and networking concerns, right? They do what they do. For us at the database layer, we are more security for us means access. Right? Who has access to the data? What level of access do they have? And that is going to be driven or dependent on um, what their responsibility is, what their role is, why do they need the data, right? That's what drives the permissions or the access you give anybody.
mm,
Right? So for us, the context for us, when we talk security, it's about managing access to the database. There's
mm.
server level access, or instance level access, there's database level permissions that we have. There's roles and permissions. And so it's
Yeah, no, I had actually gone through that.
yeah.
No, I'm just asking now with respect to the application login. I know you were speaking in that video when you were explaining the different forms of security, right? And the roles and the access. I know that you touched on the application login as one of the kind of access you could give, right? And so because of that application bit, I was a bit confused how it applies in real sense. And that's why I asked the first question about when we're talking about application, what do we mean? But now taking it a step further with respect to security now and those applications, what uh, do database administrators find a role or have a responsibility?
So for when it comes to access, right, the access we are responsible for is access to the database, so to the database servers and to the data itself. Um, there's two ways you can connect to SQL Server, and that's it: the SQL Server logins and Windows authentication. So the Windows authentication, you're accessing SQL Server using your Windows credentials when you're signed into the server. The SQL Server logins, I think that's kind of where you're going, where you have to specify username and the password, and that's I think that maybe this is what you're asking. When an application is connecting to the database,
Yeah, yeah.
there's accesses are so the users are accessing the application, right? That's where they're accessing it from. But see how we have how many users do you think we are doing Amazon, are interacting on Amazon every day? Probably hundreds of millions, right? all of those, 100 million Amazon users are not don't have an account on the Amazon backend database, right? They have an account with Amazon front end application. That's how I see my profile and all of that good stuff. But I'm not necessarily directly interacting with let's say there's a SQL Server database at the back end of Amazon. Not necessarily, there's no now the NHL login appearing to do a transaction at the back. So what happens is the application is going to talk to the database using that connection string. So in that connection string, you provide a SQL Server login. That login is going to be that's how so every interaction between the application and my database is going to be managed by that one single login, right? So typically that login will be a SQL Server account, the username and the password you specify in the string. And when anybody does a transaction, it is that login that sends the instructions from the front end application to the database. And then when the database communicates back to return the result or give output, it's through that same login. So when I go to the database and I'm checking the logs, right, and I see any transactions from that particular login, I know that, okay, yes, Amazon has sent a request, somebody made a purchase, you know, but it's through that, string, that singular login that the front end accesses the database back end.
Okay.
Yeah. So for us, as a DBA, I'm not necessarily worried about the 10,000 users that use Amazon. My focus is more on that one login that is talking to the back end, Amazon database back end from the front end. What permission do I need to give to that login to ensure that it's able to, fulfill all the requests that anybody will send, right? And then how do I ensure that I'm not giving it more than it needs? Right. So if the assumption is everybody purchasing on Amazon just needs to update a record, for example, right? If you make a purchase, what exactly happened is I need to deduct, subtract an inventory, check the inventory records, see if there's availability, and then confirm the order, right? And send instructions to shipping to ship it to you. So now if it was 10 before, now it's 9, right? So let's say that's what happens when a transaction happens, when somebody places an order.
Mm-hmm.
My job as a DBA is to ensure that that login that the front end application is using to talk to the back end is able to only do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? My job is to restrict and give that login just enough access to fulfill what assignments it needs. So we don't define the purpose of the login. The application does, or the application owners. So what will typically happen is you're going to get a request, right? You're going to get a ticket. You're going to get somebody reaching out to you on the job. They'll open a ticket and say, "Hey, can you help me can you grant access to this login? We need it to do that. They'll give you a list of things that they want you to be able to do. So based on the organization's policy around security, that will now drive whether you say yes to that request or push back, right? But that's typically our job is we get those requests to grant access. And if it conforms to our standards or the security policy of the organization, we'll go ahead and grant the access or not. But that's really where we come in that application to database security relationship.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Oh, really? In security, the main again, it's our job really is access management. When you think of what we're doing day to day on the job, what's a DBA's role with security is ensuring people have access that they need, nothing more, nothing less. It's about permissions, it's about roles, it's about ensuring people have just enough access to do their job. Um, if you don't need to be doing this, then you shouldn't have the ability to do it. That is us implementing security. So the key word for us a lot of times is policy. Jesus, all these tiny people are shouting. They should be going to go to bed. Um, there's different companies will have their own rules and policies around how they grant permission, how they grant access, um, how they grant people access. Um, Ours is to conform, make sure that anybody accessing our database or has actual access to data is conforming to those standards
Mm,
without any compromise. That's our primary focus in security is what I try to do. Is it allowed? I'll make sure you can do that and nothing more.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what's one feedback though? Which would also turn into my other question. Now, the music in the disaster recovery video, it was quite loud, so it totally overshadowed the initial presentation. You know, the first whiteboard presentation you make before.
Video. I need to check that out. The introduction.
Yeah,
I need to go look at it.
the background music was quite loud. I don't know if I can play it on here. If you probably would listen, if you can, if I can share.
No, no, I'll go and check. I'll check it from my end and see.
Okay,
Um,
but it was quite loud. I didn't hear. So, I struggled, but I couldn't pick out anything from disaster recovery.
all right. Yeah, I'll try to get that fixed. I'll see because I still have I should still be able to have access to the actual raw files, the raw video, so we should be able to fix that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What if you just want to just summarize the disaster recovery bits of that presentation? And if I understand what you had explained properly there, it was just disaster and how you recover from it. So if something happens, how do you recover?
Well, it literally is the name, right?
Yeah.
It's what's planned. The whole idea is what measures do we have
Mm-hmm.
in place to ensure that when things go wrong, inevitably, we are able to come back and still keep, providing services,
Mm-hmm.
service to end users. That kind of led into that backup and restore. That's
Mm-hmm.
key disaster recovery solution when within SQL Server, that's our primary, DR solution. But the whole general idea behind disaster recovery is we need to have measures in place. Um, there's People have, companies, not necessarily tech now, but companies have this warm sites, hot sites concept where there exists, it's almost like a replica of the actual business location with all of the infrastructure, but they exist just in case something happens in the main place. And I think that concept became popular after 9/11. Businesses, especially financial services companies, started having replica of their original locations in different places, just in case anything happens and they were compromised. So that's the idea, it's we don't plan for disaster. Um, Disasters are supposedly unplanned events, unplanned occurrences, but to the end user, to the customer, you have my money, you're my bank. I want to do services, I want to do business when it's time to do business. I want to do transfer when it's time to do transfer. I'm not necessarily thinking about that your server burns down. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So our goal is to not have to explain to the customer that the server went down or something happened or it caught fire or there was a hurricane and stuff happened. So how do we ensure that if that happens at any point, we can still come back and continue, promptly serving, providing services or, to our end users, our clients, depending on, who and who those are. So that's the general idea with disaster recovery. Um, so that leads us now into backup and restore. That's primary. That's the one. The other solutions are considered high availability, but disaster recovery, that's the primary disaster recovery solution within our SQL Server infrastructure.
Mm, okay.
But I have to check that sound thing out. Maybe somebody got ambitious, got excited. It's with the edits. So you're definitely chugging along. How are you finding the the homework so far? The the assignments with each module.
Uh, I mean, I think what I think I'm actually doing all of them. But one thing I know that I am not actively doing is repeating because there are some of the questions that like you have to do it in instance one, the class one instance, class two, class three, right? So if, for example, I've been able to successfully do it in my maybe my default instance and maybe one of the other instances, I don't necessarily go ahead to complete to repeat the same thing, right? I mean, except if I'm not confident that I can go through that process. Yeah, but the other thing I'm not doing at this time, something I know that I'm going to go back to will be all those theoretical ones where that might require going back to research, uh,
Yeah.
how many types of data types we have and all that, right? I mean, I'm really, uh, I'm more already familiar with the basic ones, right? So it's something I already have in the parking lot, and a quick search with our AI tools um, can just bring up all the. They can use a what's it called? This Microsoft Edge's AI to just bring up all the data types, and yeah, I mean, so far so good. But like I say, it just feels as if uh, I can't, I don't remember them, but I know that when I go back, that's why I look forward to the assignments, right? So as a matter of fact, what I try to do is at the beginning of each section, I just go quickly, um, as I beginning of each category, I just go quickly to look at the questions
Okay.
before I start, right? So that I can have a firm understanding of what I should be on that learning and actually firming my not
The
just
assignments.
yeah yeah no not for the assignments, right? So
Yeah.
that if I am listening to the videos, I know how it applies
Yeah.
in
Makes sense.
the real side rather than just maybe going through all the videos and going back because sometimes um if you are not in a live class, if you're not careful, it might just appear a bit boring that you're listening to someone speak. But if there's something you're looking forward to grab it, I have looked at the question, you
That's
know,
a good. That's a good
yeah,
try.
yeah, you understand. Okay, this is what it is. But yeah, so far so good. I intend to go through them, then go back and start. Uh, which other question do I have? I feel like towards the tail. How would I? The part that still appears a bit in terms of completing the process. I can complete those processes, but in terms of understanding it and being able to explain it to a 5-year-old, I still struggle a bit with the two file type, the data files or transaction log files, right? How data is captured on them and how they are backed up. If I were to back them up, I can just follow through the process. But just having it in my head, like having that, I don't know how to put it, maybe a picture of the purpose of doing this and what's intended to achieve. I'm still struggling a bit there. But if I can just explain it basically based on what I understand, um, clearly transaction log files, uh, are what they are, right? They document transactions, like whatever we're doing.
Yeah.
on the database. It's documented. Um, and my understanding of those transactions that maybe you run a particular query, it's documented, you create a database, you drop a database, you create a table. So is that correct? Are those the kind of transactions that we see? And I was looking at the video offline too, um, where the person ran a query and there was a table. I think it's also similar to what you had done. There was a table that that was generated, right? That showed the different. I had a couple of information, right? The transaction ID, it had an ID and a couple of other things. So I'm just trying to get that. I don't know if I'm making sense, anyways, but I just want to have a very, very firm um, understanding of
Yeah.
yeah.
Just think of it, I guess give it a high level, right? With the log files, the transaction log files, it's like keeping minutes of a meeting. Um, Once the meeting starts, the secretary is taking note of what's going on, right? It's your recording event or like a diary, you know, this is what happened today. This is the,
Mm,
how the day started. This is what I did, this is what I did. It's a record of events. Sometimes when we say transactions, it sounds a bit more technical than it actually is. Is what is happening where somebody signed in, that's an event. That's that can count as that's an event that gets logged. You run a backup, that's an event. It's going to show Michael ran backup at this time, right? That's what's happening. That's how the log gets written to or gets populated. It's record of activities. Login is an activity. Somebody deleting something, deleting a record is an event. Adding new records, that's an event. All of those get recorded to the log files, right? So for the log is more capturing events that have happened on the database, right? So then, but the data files itself that's where the data lives.
mhm,
I add 20 new records to the student database. Those 20 records are going to the data files. So the log will record that 20 new students were admitted or where a script was run by Namdi that did this.
mm,
That's what log file. It's a record. It's just saying this happened. But the effect of it, the actual data change happens on the data files. Right. So that's where that's where you see the data files tend to be the bigger things because that's where actual data is moving to or being stored at. If we have 100 record transaction, that's the data files that gets that 100 million new records or that 10,000 new records. The log is just like, hey, this happened, check. Um, and so you'll see in practice, the log files are typically smaller in size. You see when we're doing
mm,
the configuration, right? The database
mhm,
configuration. The log files were smaller, lesser space was allocated to the log files than to the data files because the data files by default is going to be receiving more volume. The log is just a diary. Right now, it's a very important diary, but that's essentially what it is. It's capturing events that happens on that particular database.
mm. So now, in terms of volume, right? And when I say volume, I might not be. I don't know how if. Okay, when I say volume, I mean if we're looking at it in terms of table rows and columns, right? In terms of volume now, my thinking is that the transaction log files will typically have more information. Is that safe to say? Because if you're
Uh,
talking about different transactions, it should have um,
So the behavior is different, right? It's if I'm imputing 10,000 records with one command, um, it might be a case of, well, okay,
mm,
there's more activity on the logs because of the complexity of how the transaction that it's not necessarily a formula basically. Um, the log files is just it's not even necessarily following the rows and columns pattern. The rows and columns is to store data.
Yeah.
Um, the data is stored as rows and columns in the data files. The transaction log files, you're not querying them. We're not necessarily we're not, you actually have to go into the logs in SQL Server and read it directly. Um, so it's not the rows and columns concepts will be more applicable to the data files. Um, but again, the transaction logs can have um, a lot of records, even for small transactions, maybe not high volume transactions. And high volume meaning like a lot of large data sizes. Um, it might be a one-line record on the transaction log file, even though we push 10,000 new records. So it's not always simultaneous.
Okay.
Uh, right? It just depends on what's the command, what was the instruction that led to the event. That's what the log is capturing.
Hmm.
So in the grand scheme of database architecture and infrastructure, it's not. Um, we expect the log files to be less in terms of size, um, because you're not data-wise, you're not holding any actual data per se. Um, you're just a tracker of events. Um, so the rows and columns impacts, that's for your data. That's how data is organized inside in tables in the database. And so data files, that's where that is, I'll say that is more applicable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, then this one, I mean, I've probably not got into this bit, but just asking again, in respect to the, I don't want to say virtual, but like um there's a word I'm looking for now. So but just looking like you using Azure, right?
Say that again.
Azure.
Oh, that's Azure is cloud. So I
Yeah,
don't
cloud. You don't you didn't cover anything on cloud.
cover it in the program. But that's his own lane of sorts. Azure is like his own platform. Even though once you get past the infrastructure of it, it's still database administration. So I would say but we don't get into it at all in this program. Um, but
Okay.
down the road, maybe like we can still talk through just high level what's it's in the end, it's just a cloud platform. That's maybe I'm minimizing it too much, but
Yeah, I mean, I have like a also high level understanding about it. Like so, just like you would have your virtual machine being installed.
yeah, it's pretty much in the same,
Mhm.
category. It's really doing its virtualization go on steroids, right? It's
But it's more or
Microsoft.
less you're not you're on the cloud basically.
And now Microsoft is you're outsourcing all of your server hosting to Microsoft. So your data center you're basically renting data center from Microsoft or from Amazon in case of AWS. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, it's it's not it's its own realm. Um, generally.
Okay. Oh, so I think I'm done with some of the questions I had noted. But the other questions I have would probably be around the career path and all that. One of which might just be which areas um would one need to show strong competence in, right? Especially for someone that doesn't have a tech background per se. Um, just wondering if you were to, if one was to sell himself, I mean, there's something you have to say you're probably very, very good at, right? Is it backup?
I won't worry about for now. I'll just say consume the material. The because the what you have already is very stripped down. It's all the noise removed. It's really a real they're all very practical day to day. What you would deal with on the job type things for the most part. So I have areas where I want you to focus on when you're almost know areas when it's time for interviews. But I won't talk about it now. Um, because I don't want you to shift your
Mhm.
shift it to those ones at the moment because everything is connected. There are certain things you need that build they're like foundation for something else. So they might not be as critical as the next thing, but they are necessary if you're going to the other one is going to make sense. So I'd rather just you consume the content. This was just one weekend. And it will all of it will come together. And I'll still give you more tips as we go down the road. I'll say just let's give it a few more weeks, then we can start diving into more career heavy conversations.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, then one last thing, maybe before the roundup, will be around file groups, right?
Our groups, they're think of them as folders. They don't have any purpose, generally speaking. They do have purpose, but it's when you start doing things like partitioning and those are even that is almost phased out. Um, so in terms of the value to just day to day what we do, um, file groups they don't impact anything. Um, they don't. So I won't flog it. At the high level, it's just I'm organizing my data files into file groups, right? It's an organizational thing, but does it make any difference or does it not necessarily? Uh, it doesn't it doesn't impact how data is written. So it's when you start doing more um like I don't even go into partition in the course at all because it's practice wise, that's not something we deal with. But that will be where you start. Maybe that's where partitioning, file groups now come into play. So when I start doing those partitioning, those are use that's more relevant when we start doing data warehousing. Not we, but when in a data warehousing space, they'll use maybe table partitions, timestamp partitions to query data from, instead of course the whole idea behind data warehouses is like have massive amounts of analytical data. Um, that you don't want to keep in your live database, the live server where business is going on. Because if it's too much data, it will slow down transaction. So people put all this analytical data, random data set, random data gathered from the internet. They store it in a warehouse. So SQL Server now invented this solution where you can store records in partitions. So partitions, you can use maybe timestamps to do partitions. So I can keep a partition for every month. In that way, I don't have to, when I want to query the database or the table, I don't need to query the entire data set. I'm just querying a partition, like a smaller subset. So it's easier
Mm.
to work with. That is when with that file groups begin to have um, comes into play for the most part. But in transactional data, like what we are actually doing and we're responsible for, doesn't really come to play like that. Um,
Okay.
so if you can still do some more, digging into it. But like in practice, will you create a file group on the job? Probably not. I never did one. Uh, I never had to create one, special file group or anything like that.
Okay. Um, and with the database monitoring, I know when you were looking at some of those monitoring tools, I was just asking myself, is it necessary for someone to really understand um, like the graphs, the spikes? Is it something that one really needs to know?
Nah, it's more you need to know like the whole concept. So that's for Perfmon. Um,
Hmm.
that's it's mostly used by server engineers, really. Uh, but there are some counters in there that maybe we are maybe database specific or and so you, it's there's too many of them. Like which one do you know? Which one do you study? Which one don't you? So server engineers are the ones that mostly use it. A lot of third-party tools use the data from there. Um, use the data from there to you know create dashboards and all. Um, so that's um, that's where the value really is. But it's good to be familiar. So it's all those like the tax manager, it's more okay, these are quick, take a look. How was the situation of things with my server before we really jump into the database, and start probing. Or see, do we even need to check the database and go deep into it to probe for anything?
Okay.
So I think if you wanted to maybe look for more, what are some if you wanted to research more or go wider, and I think it's in the homework actually, it's probably one of the homework assignments. It's asking for just look into what are some database specific, performance counters. Um,
Mm.
those might be good to maybe read up on and see what it looks like. Um, but that's as far as perform on. That's as far as I would go to check. Everything else there is it's the server engineers know what to do with most of that more than we would ever need to.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I'll keep dropping questions.
Yeah. So as you have them, just and you can even compile them maybe for these sessions. So it's
Yeah,
can also
I took a note. Like that's why it seemed as if a lot of the ones that were quite organized were around application and backup and disaster recovery. I took notes by that time.
yeah,
So what happens is that sometimes when I'm probably going through them, I might not have um, yeah, but I think I'll take more organized notes next time.
yeah. But I think you're doing well. Um, you're you're getting it. So that's the most important part.
Mm. That's encouraging.
You're getting it.
Yeah.
Just I mean,
I mean,
getting
I want to get to a point where I'm just obsessed about the whole thing, right?
uh,
That's when I know I'm 100%
to
into something.
like I mean to call it like practice. I just go deeper than the material, and see implement everything you see on YouTube, what any topic we go over, right? If you let what are the other things that maybe I didn't go into, um, find find random things people are doing and try to do it,
Yeah.
and see what happens. Those those will lead you. Those are valid questions that we can actually look at. Like, okay, I tried to do this and I saw. You might need to give me more context on what you're trying to do. But the best way to expand your scope is to run into problems.
Mm.
Um, Try random stuff. Somebody is doing something you like, that it's in line with what you're doing. Try to do it. See what happens. There's no risk at this point. You can't necessarily you can't destroy any. There's no consequence, right? There's nothing to destroy, and there's no money at stake here. So you're not dealing with business data. So this is the time to make all the mistakes.
Yeah.
So that would be what I would recommend is just go in, get on YouTube. YouTube University is the best. Especially once you have the foundations now from the content from class.
Mm-hmm.
And now you can go into and see what magic people are performing on YouTube and see how much of it you can replicate.
Okay. Yeah, because there's something I saw today. I was going to try, which was to export data from the table in one instance to another instance, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was something. Even though I think it's pretty straightforward, but it's something I was going to try.
I tried. I mean, create your own, whether it's a spreadsheet or something, try the export process, see what comes out of it. If you
Mm-hmm.
work, you're really happy. And if it doesn't work, you learn something.
Yeah.
So that's what I recommend. Just build on the wider you can go, the better. There's no, I mean, like what we have, the material you have is comprehensive. Um, but I don't stop at what I'm taught. I go beyond.
Mm.
That's just a way to do it. You run into new problems, to expand your thought process, expand the solutions you have access to. And that's that's what you need. Yeah, that's how you keep advancing.
All right. Thank you so much. I
All
think
right,
it's
no problem.
so. I'll see you next week,
Yes,
Tuesday.
sir.
But before then, I'll keep in touch.
We'll be on Slack.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
All right, have a good evening.
Okay, you too.